Hello, ladies and gentlemen, GRRA members. Welcome to today's special edition of our Real Talk podcast. We are welcoming one of our trusted and long-term sponsors, RJ Meyerhoffer with Rate. RJ, welcome to the GRRA podcast studio.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. It's really cool to be here.
I just want to start by asking you, how did you get into the mortgage business? What struck your initial passion? Is it something you've always wanted to do?
I have actually been around over 3 decades in the mortgage industry. I got into this in 1993. During that time, I assure you that I, did not grow up thinking I want to be, a mortgage loan officer. A relative of mine, my aunt, was in the mortgage industry at that time. She said, "You know what? I think you would be really good at this." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." So I gave it a shot, and here we are 3 decades later. I actually was a radio announcer for 5 years in my hometown back in the day, which I think has helped tremendously. Definitely taught me how to speak properly, and that's come in handy a few times.
How long have you been specifically with Rate for?
I've actually been with Rate for 16 years, which is really unusual, I think, for mortgage loan officers. That's a very long time with a company, but they've actually enabled me to grow and to help me become the loan officer that I am today. So I don't think that I would have probably had the degree of success that I've had I not went to Rate. And that was right after the housing crash. I was a self-employed mortgage broker prior to the housing crash, and we were trying to figure things out for a year, and I wound up at Rate, and I'm still here. And then as far as my involvement with the Greensboro Regional Realtors Association, I would say that that's been 15, 20 years now. At least nothing is the same. And it's an ever-changing industry. Just like real estate, we're constantly faced with new challenges and new rules and new ways of having to do our business, and of course, how to having to adapt. I'm not going to say that salespeople, mortgage people, and real estate professionals love change. If you're still standing after all these years, then I think that you've learned how to grow and adapt to whatever the market conditions may be.
What are some of those greatest problems, issues you're seeing related to mortgage financing with buyers right now?
Yeah, in the current day, you know what? There's quite a few things that I think are challenging with buyers. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that we don't have an affordability issue, because we definitely do. And it's not just within housing. Just the general cost of living is outrageous. When I'm looking at people's finances and their situation in terms of buying a home, sometimes, I mean, it's eye opening, because it's hard to know or to imagine exactly how they're navigating all of it. With housing, there's a lot going on. I mean, we've got higher real estate taxes here locally. We're not really sure how that's going to play out until June. But then homeowners insurance is higher. The cost of housing is higher. I personally don't think that rates are really high right now. I think they're in a reasonable range. But the thing that buyers are having trouble with is affordability. I think that really has to do with just the overall scope of the economy.
As people are shopping around and getting pre-approved and looking at like getting an agent, what is the biggest mistake you're seeing buyers make?
I've got a laundry list of things that we could actually
Cool.
cover here.
Yeah.
And I'll name a few things that stand out to me just from being on the front lines
Okay.
every day. One of the biggest problems is that people are waiting too long to get pre-approved. But it feels to me like there's a pattern here recently of buyers wanting to go out and find that property, fall in love with the house of their dreams, and then work on the pre-approval process. And that's a problem. We can generally pre-approve you same day, sometimes within just an hour or two, but it takes you as the buyer, as the consumer, to do the application and to send us W-2s, pay stub, income, assets. I mean, we need a minute to review all of this. And I've seen some situations recently where the buyer delayed on that pre-approval, fell in love, and we were scrambling to get it done. And even though we had that pre-approval done within just a couple hours, they lost out on that property because they went with another buyer, obviously, who was, by the way, prepared. The other thing I think is I think consumers, they get really caught up on the interest rate without really being focused in on the cost for that interest rate. It would be really easy for any lender to quote a rate that's, maybe an eighth to a quarter lower than what a competitor is quoting. The problem with that is it's often costing the consumer thousands of additional dollars in closing cost to get the rate that low. So I think people, they get a little hung up on the interest rate piece of it without really looking at the overall picture regarding payment and, of course, the strategy of what they're trying to accomplish. So that just simply always comes back to making sure that you're working with the right, mortgage professional, and that you have a strategy.
If someone is thinking about buying in the next 6 to 12 months, what should they be doing in addition to what you said about making sure you're pre-approved first? Or
Yeah, that's really the first step. I think, if somebody is like say 6 to 12 months out from purchasing, they're not really honed in on going ahead and talking to a mortgage loan officer about their finances. But I don't think that, that's too far out. I think the sooner that you work on that, the better. One thing I wish people would stop doing is trying to self-diagnose their credit. If you're not dealing with credit on a daily basis, you really don't understand it the way that a mortgage professional does. We see people who feel like they have to have perfect credit, or that they know how to get their credit ready to be pre-approved. And we'll see people close accounts, or they'll pay off or pay down the wrong accounts that ultimately, had we been able to look at it and advise them, they would have reached a higher level on, say, credit score. Because, like closing accounts, for example, that's going to drop your credit score because you're losing some of your credit history. Your credit score is going to benefit much more greatly from reducing revolving debt like credit cards and things like that versus, say, paying down or paying off an installment loan like a car loan. Because when you pay off an installment loan, that account is going to close. There again, you've lost that history. There's just a lot of misconceptions about the process. If a buyer can go ahead and align themselves with a lender, have their financial situation looked at, their credit, their assets, just really to get a better handle on where they are and if they need work as they head into, say, 6 to 12 months down the road. So there's a lot that we can do to make sure you're in the best position. So the sooner the better. That's my answer.
what is something you believe about the current housing market that most people would disagree with?
Currently, mortgage rates are, say, in a 6 to 6.75 range. Historically, that is not too bad. I am from the belief that we're in an environment right now where the interest rates are not that high. Even if you just compare that to a year ago when rates were pushing 7%. Now we're hovering around 6%. So we're 3/4 to 1% lower on rates. It feels that rates are higher because of the things that we just mentioned: the cost of housing, increased real estate taxes, increased homeowners insurance. That, again, is creating a real affordability issue. If you look at the history of rates, and if we just took, say, the last 20 years as a whole, I would say rates have averaged from 6 to 8% that whole time. And a lot of people are still hung up on the anomaly that was, 2021, when we had rates in the 2 to 3% range. I can tell you that nobody in this industry feels that that's ever going to come back. I think that was a once in a lifetime event. I would say that that is it, that I don't think that rates are just really out of line. And I would say, as a consumer, as a prospective home buyer, if you're comfortable with the payment and you can make that work with your budget, going ahead and pursuing real estate and buying real estate and beginning that process of building equity and building your net worth is huge. But again, you just have to be ready, and you just have to kind of accept and understand that this is the market, and it's not a bad time to buy at all. I think it's a great time. If you can get past that mentality of waiting on rates to come down or waiting for the market to crash, depending on who you listen to on social media, that would be kind of, I think, where I'm a little different than other people. It's our job to educate our community and to really guide people. It's not just those of us in the industry that understand the value that real estate brings, but it is ultimately up to us to spread that word and to educate.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this special edition Real Talk episode with our dear friend RJ Meyerhoffer at Rate. RJ, thank you so much for joining us today and making time in your busy schedule.
Well, hey, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And hey, let's do it again soon.
You can listen to this edition of Real Talk. We'll be posting it to our YouTube channel. We'll be sharing it in our social media channels and in our news blast. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening and have a great day.